Welcome back to my channel, where real story takes its time. Let's get into it.
Hey Reddit, my name's Adam, and I just turned 20 last week. I didn't expect my birthday to become the day that pushed me to finally leave my parents' house for good. But I guess there's something poetic about realizing your worth right when the people closest to you try to strip it away. For as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one in my family. Not because anyone ever asked me to be, but because someone had to be. My parents, especially my dad, have always been about family loyalty, which really just means doing whatever benefits him and my older brother, Michael. Michael's 24, still living at home, and has a history of making big promises about life-changing business ventures that somehow always end with my parents bailing him out. I, on the other hand, found peace in working with my hands. Since I was 14, I've been collecting and upgrading my tools, drills, saws, precision equipment, everything. I loved building things, fixing furniture, even restoring old machines from the junkyard. It was more than a hobby. It was my escape. Every polished surface, every small success in my projects reminded me that I could create something good even in a house that constantly drained me. My tools were the one thing I bought with my own money, earned from part-time jobs and weekend repairs for neighbors. They were my pride, my independence, my future. Now, to understand how things went downhill, you have to get a sense of my dad. He's the kind of man who talks about sacrifice, but never makes any himself. He acts like the patriarch, claiming everything under his roof belongs to him, no matter who paid for it. My mom follows his lead most of the time, sometimes silently, sometimes backing him up with that tone of guilt she's perfected over the years. And then there's Michael, the golden boy. He's smooth-talking, confident, and always manages to make his failures sound like noble efforts. When he crashed the old family car last year, Dad called it a learning experience. When I asked to buy a used one with my savings, Dad said, "Cars are a luxury. Be patient." So, yeah, it's always been that kind of dynamic. Me working, saving, and staying quiet, while Michael gets applauded for trying. Still, I never let myself get too bitter. I had my tools, my small workshop in the shed out back, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that at least something in my life was mine. That brings us to my birthday. It was a Sunday, and I was supposed to have the day off. I'd planned to spend it in the shed finishing up a custom bench for a local cafe owner, my first paid commission that wasn't just from someone down the street. It was a big deal to me. But when I went out that morning, I noticed something strange. The shed was locked. Not just closed, locked with a padlock that wasn't mine. At first, I thought maybe Dad was just keeping it secure, but when I asked him about it, he didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Oh, that," he said casually. "Don't worry about it, son. We needed to make some space." "Make some space," I repeated, trying to keep my voice calm. "Yeah," he said, finally folding the paper. "Your mom and I decided to sell some of the stuff in there. You had way too much clutter, and with Michael's new business idea, we needed some quick cash for the family fund. You'll get new tools eventually." For a second, I couldn't process what he said. Sell some of the stuff? Family fund. I walked outside and opened the shed, or rather, tried to. The padlock was gone now, and when I stepped in, I froze. The walls looked bare. The shelves that once held my carefully labeled boxes were empty. My workbench was gone. The big red toolbox I'd spent months saving for gone. Even the small wooden stool I'd built myself was missing. The air smelled like dust and betrayal. I went back inside, heart pounding. "You sold my tools?" I asked. My voice cracked, and I hated how small I sounded. Dad didn't flinch. "Yes, Adam. Don't make that face. You're overreacting. You live under my roof, and everything in this house is part of the household. Family comes first. Michael's trying to start something for us all, and sometimes that means sacrifices." "Sacrifices?" I repeated quietly. "You just sold my future for one of his business ideas." Dad sighed, as if I was being difficult. "You don't understand responsibility yet, son. Those tools aren't your future. They're just things. You'll get new ones someday. Besides, you don't need all that stuff right now." I could feel my hands shaking. "I bought those with my money," I said. "Every single one." He shrugged. "And you used them on our property. That makes them family property. You've been living here rent-free." Consider it even. Mom stood behind him, wringing her hands like she always does when things get tense. Adam, sweetheart, she said softly. You know your father's just trying to help your brother. It's for all of us. No, I said. It's for Michael. It's always for him. Michael chose that moment to stroll in, grinning like this was all a joke. Come on, man, he said, patting my shoulder. You'll get over it. Dad's right, you'll get new ones. Think of it as an investment in me. When my business takes off, we'll both win. I stared at him. You sold everything I worked for, I said slowly. Everything I built with my own hands. Stop being dramatic, Dad said, his voice rising slightly. You're acting like a child. It's just stuff. We'll replace it when things are better. That word, replace, echoed in my head. Replace. As if the countless hours I spent saving, the sweat, the nights I stayed up fixing old machines, all meant nothing. I realized then that my dad didn't just sell my tools. He sold the one piece of independence I had left. I didn't yell. I didn't argue anymore. I just stood there, looking at them, my father smug in his authority, my mother avoiding eye contact, and my brother pretending this was some kind of family bonding moment. Something in me went quiet. I went up to my room and sat on my bed for a long time, staring at the blank wall. All my plans, my projects, my dream of starting a small repair business gone. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to earn their respect, the times I'd hoped my dad would finally say, I'm proud of you. But deep down, I knew that moment would never come. That night, while everyone was asleep, I walked out to the shed one last time. The emptiness inside it hurt more than I expected. It wasn't just about tools. It was about every time they dismissed my effort, every moment I was told to wait my turn, every sacrifice I made that no one noticed. I realized something important. They didn't see me as a person. I was just the backup plan, the steady one they could take from without asking. When morning came, I had a choice to make. Stay and swallow my pride, or finally take back what little control I had left. So I made a decision. And by the time the sun rose, the shed wasn't empty anymore, but the house was missing a few things. That's when it started, the real story. The one that made my mom gasp in shock, made Michael furious, and made Dad storm through the backyard shouting. Who emptied the shed overnight? The morning after my tools disappeared, the house felt heavier. Not physically, but in the way tension clings to the air like humidity before a storm. My dad acted like nothing had happened. He was at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee and scrolling through his phone. My mom moved around quietly, setting plates, humming under her breath. Michael was on a call, laughing loudly, bragging to someone about getting seed money. Every laugh from him felt like a slap. I poured myself some coffee and sat down without saying a word. My dad glanced up briefly. You look like you didn't sleep, he said, as if he didn't know why. I didn't, I replied flatly. Well, that's on you, he said. You shouldn't dwell on things you can't change. You're young. You'll bounce back. I bit the inside of my cheek to stop myself from snapping. Bounce back. That's what he always said when something went wrong. When the car I was fixing got taken so Michael could test drive it. When my savings, temporarily, went to cover Michael's credit card bill. When my mom's promise to make it up to me never materialized. Mom placed a plate of eggs in front of me. Eat, sweetheart. You'll feel better once you've had breakfast. Do you even hear yourselves? I asked quietly. You took everything I've worked for and sold it. For him. My dad sighed, as if I were a petulant child instead of a grown adult. It wasn't personal, Adam. You make it sound like we robbed you. You did, I said. You didn't even ask. He pushed his chair back slightly. Watch your tone. You live under my roof. I make the decisions here. The money from those tools went into the family fund. We all benefit. I looked at Michael, who was now scrolling through his phone. Do we all benefit, or just you? Michael smirked. You're welcome to be part of the project if you want, man. I mean, you've got the time. The project? I repeated. Dad leaned forward, clasping his hands. Your brother's starting a landscaping company. He's got vision, Adam. He just needed some capital to get started. Mowers, trailers, marketing. That's why we had to make that decision. Wait, I said slowly. You sold my tools so he could buy his equipment? Dad nodded. Exactly. And don't look at it like that. You're part of this family. When his business succeeds, we all win. I stared at them, speechless. The irony was so thick, it was almost laughable. I'd been working toward opening my own repair service for months. Even had a small online page set up for commissions. I was one job away from buying a used van to transport my work. And now my future had been traded for my brother's next failure, dressed up as vision. Michael looked up again, all smug confidence. Don't be bitter, Adam. You'll see. Once this takes off, we'll hire you on. You can do the maintenance for our machines. Family business, right? That did it. I stood up. You took my tools to make me your employee? Dad's jaw tightened. You're being ungrateful. I laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. Ungrateful? You stripped me of everything I've built because you believe in his ideas more than my hard work. Mom stepped in, voice soft but firm. Adam, please. You're twisting this. Your father made a tough choice for the good of everyone. You'll get your chance too. You just have to be patient. I turned to her. How long have I been patient, Mom? When Michael dropped out of college and you used my tuition fund to pay his debt, I was patient. When he borrowed my car and wrecked it, I was patient. When he took my workshop for his storage, I was patient. But this, I gestured toward the window, toward the empty shed. This was mine. And you sold it. Dad slammed his hand against the table. Enough. You will not talk to your mother like that. I froze, not because I was scared, but because I realized nothing I said would ever matter. He wasn't listening. None of them were. The rest of the morning was silent. Michael went out to meet investors. Mom retreated to the garden, and Dad buried himself in paperwork. I sat alone, staring out the window, thinking about every time they'd brushed off my efforts. I thought about the old workshop, the smell of wood shavings, the hum of my tools, the quiet satisfaction of creation. All gone because my father couldn't stand the idea of me succeeding on my own terms. Later that afternoon, I heard my parents talking in the living room. Their voices were low but carried through the thin walls. Mom, he's not taking it well. Dad, he'll come around. He has nowhere else to go. Mom, you shouldn't have said what you did. Dad, I said what needed to be said. He lives here. He follows the rules. Mom, but selling his things without asking. Dad, I don't need to ask my own son for permission in my house. I felt something inside me harden. That was the moment I stopped feeling like their son and started feeling like a stranger who just happened to live under their roof. That night, Michael came home beaming, holding fast food and acting like nothing was wrong. Big news, man, he said, dropping into the seat across from me. Dad got me a meeting with a local contractor. They might partner with me. Can you believe it? Yeah, I said quietly. I can believe it. He didn't catch the tone. This is the real deal. If it works, we'll have jobs lined up all summer. You should come on board before it's too late. Too late? I asked. He shrugged. Yeah, once it takes off, I'll need reliable people around. Not sure I'll have time to train you later. It was like he genuinely believed he was doing me a favor. I studied his face, the smugness, the certainty that everything would always go his way because Dad would make sure it did. Good luck with that, I said, standing up. He frowned. Don't be like that, man. We're family. Yeah, I said, heading to my room. That's what you keep telling me. Over the next few days, things got worse. Every time I passed my dad, he'd remind me that hard work is about attitude. He kept hinting that I should support my brother's vision. Michael started using my old storage cabinet for his supplies. Gas cans, gloves, hoses, all piled where my organized toolboxes used to be. Mom tried to play peacemaker, dropping lines like, "You know how your father gets," or "He's just stressed about money." But the truth was, it wasn't just about money. It was about control. My dad couldn't stand that I'd built something without his involvement. He couldn't stand that my success didn't revolve around his approval. By the fourth day, I'd stopped talking to them altogether. I left early in the morning, came home late, and spent my time thinking. I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't staying there much longer. Then came the breaking point. It was a Thursday evening, and I came home to find Michael in the driveway with a brand new trailer hitched to Dad's truck. He was showing it off, talking loudly on speakerphone. I overheard bits of the conversation. Yeah, man, the money came through. Sold some old junk my brother had lying around. He's dramatic, but whatever, he'll get over it. I froze. My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Dad came out a moment later, slapping Michael on the back. "Proud of you, son. This is how you make things happen." Michael grinned. "Thanks, Dad. Couldn't have done it without you." I stepped closer. "Yeah," I said quietly. "You really couldn't have." Dad turned, frowning. "Don't start, Adam. This is a good day." "For you?" I said. "For me. It's just another reminder of what you took." "Watch your mouth," he snapped. I laughed bitterly. "Why? Are you going to sell that too?" Mom appeared at the doorway. "Please, stop arguing. Can't we just have one evening without this?" But I was done being quiet. "You want peace, Mom? Then admit it. You took my life's work and handed it to him because you didn't believe in me." Michael rolled his eyes. "Man, you're so dramatic. It's not that deep." "It is to me," I said. "Those tools were all I had." Dad's voice dropped, cold and sharp. "Then maybe you should have been grateful you had a place to keep them. I could have made you pay rent long ago. You're lucky I didn't." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I'd never win. Not by arguing, not by reasoning, not by waiting. My father didn't respect effort, only obedience. And Michael didn't care about anything that wasn't his own success. So I shut my mouth, turned around, and went inside. That night, I packed quietly, not just my clothes, but every small thing they hadn't noticed yet was mine. I wasn't going to leave empty-handed this time. The next morning, the house woke to the usual sounds: Dad making coffee, Michael bragging over breakfast, Mom pretending nothing was wrong. None of them noticed that my door was open and my bed stripped clean. And in the backyard, the shed door stood wide open. But this time, it wasn't empty. By the time Dad realized what was missing, it was too late. He came storming out, shouting my name, demanding answers. Michael was yelling too. Mom stood frozen at the door, one hand over her mouth. "Who emptied the shed overnight?" Dad roared. But I was already gone. And while they stood there fuming, trying to make sense of it, I was miles away, heading toward the place where the next part of this story really begins. When I left that morning, I didn't look back. The sun was barely rising, painting the sky in a hazy orange glow, and the air smelled like freedom and adrenaline. My car, an old pickup I'd bought cheap from a neighbor and spent months fixing up, was loaded to the brim with the last bits of my life from that house. A few clothes, my documents, some small tools I'd managed to hide from my dad's family fund purge, and a few personal things that reminded me who I was before everything got swallowed up by resentment. I didn't have a clear plan, but I had an idea. I'd been doing side jobs for a mechanic in town, Mr. Larson. He was one of the few people who actually treated me like I had potential. He once told me, "Kid, the difference between people who build things and people who take them is pride. You've got pride. Don't lose it." His words stuck with me, so I drove straight to his shop. When I pulled into the lot, he was already there, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee. His brow furrowed when he saw me. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "Didn't," I admitted. "I'm done at home. They sold my tools, Larson. Every single one." He let out a slow whistle. "Your folks did that." I nodded. "For my brother's business." Said it was for the family fund. He shook his head. "That's rough, kid. Real rough. But you did the right thing leaving. Once people show you they'll cross a line, they'll keep crossing it." I leaned against the counter, staring at the floor. I don't even know where to start. Everything I built is gone. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You still got your hands, don't you? And your brain? You can rebuild. You can use my tools here after hours if you need to." It was more generosity than I'd expected. "I can't ask that of you," I said. "You didn't ask," he replied simply. "I'm offering." That was the first real kindness I'd felt in weeks. For the next few days, I worked at his shop during the day and slept in the small loft above the garage. It wasn't much, just a mattress, a desk, and a single lamp, but it was peaceful. I could breathe. I could think. For the first time, I felt like I had control over my own life. But freedom comes with echoes. I didn't expect my parents to just let me go quietly, and I was right. On the third morning after leaving, my phone started blowing up: texts, missed calls, voicemails. First from Mom, then Dad, then Michael. Mom's messages were the same tone she always used when she wanted to sound reasonable. "Adam, your father is upset. You can't just leave like that. Please call us. We can talk this out. Then, we need to discuss what you took. Your father says there are things missing. Things missing. The nerve. I hadn't taken anything that wasn't mine. Just a few spare parts, some what I'd bought, and a few personal tools I'd hidden in the attic weeks before. Then came Dad's texts. This is unacceptable. You think you can just run away and take my property? Everything on this land belongs to me. Return what you took, or I'll call the police. I didn't reply. Then Michael chimed in. Real mature move, bro. You're making Mom worry. Dad says you took the generator and the compressor. You better bring those back before things get ugly. That one made me laugh bitterly. The generator and compressor were mine. I bought them secondhand from a retired carpenter years ago. They had no idea what belonged to who anymore. They just assumed everything was theirs. I ignored them all and focused on work. But the silence didn't last long. The betrayal that came next didn't come in a single moment. It crept in slowly, like rust spreading on metal until it finally breaks. A few days later, Larson handed me the shop phone. Somebody's asking for you, he said. I hesitated. Who? He smirked. Didn't say. Sounded like trouble, though. I took the receiver. Hello. Adam. A familiar voice said sharply. My dad. I tensed. How did you get this number? Doesn't matter. You've caused enough damage already. You emptied the shed and stole family property. You're going to return it. Today. I didn't steal anything, I said evenly. I took what was mine. You're in no position to argue with me, he snapped. You're still my son, and you'll respect my house. If you don't return what you took, I'll file a report. I almost laughed. You'd really tell the police your son stole his own tools? Go ahead. Show them the receipts. You don't have any, because you never bought them. He was silent for a moment, then said, You're being selfish. Michael's working hard to support this family, and you're undermining him. By existing? I asked. By finally saying no? You're ungrateful, Adam. After everything we've done for you. Done for me? I said quietly. You mean using my savings for Michael, selling my things without asking, and calling it love? Yeah, I'm done with that kind of help. I hung up. Larson raised an eyebrow. Family trouble? Yeah, I said. Same story, different day. But it wasn't the end of it. Later that week, I found out what they'd done next, and that's when it stopped being just about pride. It became personal. I was scrolling through my social media one evening when I noticed something strange. My page, the one where I posted photos of my projects and repair work, was gone. At first, I thought maybe I'd been hacked. But when I checked my email, I found a message from the platform. Your account has been deleted by request. Confused, I checked the details. The deletion request had come from my dad's email. My stomach dropped. He'd had my login info from years ago when I first made the account and asked him to help me verify it. I never thought to change the password. He'd gone in, deleted my entire business page, and wiped out all my client messages, photos, everything. Years of progress, gone with one click. I called him immediately. He answered on the second ring, sounding calm. Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Did you delete my page? I did, he said simply. You're not using our internet connection to promote your side business anymore. I'm not paying for your little hobby. It wasn't a hobby. I snapped. It was my work. He raised his voice slightly. You don't talk to me like that. You abandoned this family, Adam. You don't get to profit off the name you left behind. The name I left behind? I repeated. You mean the one you dragged through the mud for years? You think deleting my page will stop me? I think it'll remind you where you come from, he said coldly. You can't cut us out like that. You'll see that sooner or later. When I hung up, I just sat there for a while, staring at the wall. The betrayal wasn't just about deleting a page. It was about control. He couldn't stand that I'd escaped his reach, so he had to ruin what little independence I was building for myself. That night, I called my mom. She answered quickly. Adam, she said, sounding anxious. I'm glad you called. Please, can we talk? Did you know Dad deleted my page? Silence. Mom. Finally, she sighed. He told me he was going to. I tried to talk him out of it, but you know how he is. You let him. I said quietly. I didn't let him, she insisted. He's your father, Adam. I can't stop him from doing what he thinks is right. I felt something break in me then, something small but irreversible. Then you're just as guilty. I said. Don't say that, she whispered. You know I love you. If that's love, Mom, I said, I don't want it anymore. I hung up. The next morning, Larson noticed I was quieter than usual. You look like you've been punched, he said. In a way, I have, I muttered. They deleted everything I built online. My clients, my reputation, it's all gone. He nodded slowly. Then it's time to start again. This time without anyone's name attached, but yours. His words lit something in me again, a spark I thought was gone. I spent the next few days rebuilding. New page, new number, new contact list. I started reaching out to old clients and explaining what happened. Most were sympathetic, some even angry on my behalf. Slowly, the work began to come back. And then, just when I started to feel like I was stabilizing, the next betrayal hit. Michael showed up at the shop. I was under a car when I heard Larson call my name. Adam, you've got a visitor. I slid out from under the vehicle, wiped my hands, and froze. There he was, leaning against the door frame with that same smug expression I'd seen my entire life. Hey man, he said casually. Nice setup you got here. What do you want, Michael? Relax, he said. I just came to talk. Dad told me where you were. Of course he did. He walked around the shop, pretending to admire the place. So this is where you've been hiding. Not bad. You're really serious about this, huh? I always was, I said. He chuckled. Yeah, I can tell. Shame about your old business page. You should have seen Dad when he deleted it. He was fired up. Said it was time you learned a lesson about loyalty. I stared at him, trying to read his expression. You think this is funny? He shrugged. I think you're being stubborn. Dad's not the enemy, you know? He just wants what's best for us. Us? I asked. You mean you? He smirked. Call it what you want. Anyway, listen, I might have a proposal. I folded my arms. I'm not interested. Don't be so quick, he said. My landscaping business is taking off. I need someone who knows tools and maintenance. You'd be perfect. Dad even said he'd let bygones be bygones if you came back home. I laughed, but it came out more like a scoff. You steal from me, destroy my work, and then offer me a job fixing your mess? Think about it, he said. It's family. It's what Mom wants too. That last sentence did it. My blood went cold. You talked to Mom about this? He grinned. Of course. She misses you. She says you've changed, that you're holding grudges. She told Dad it'd be good for everyone if you just apologized and came home. Apologized? For leaving? For standing up for myself? For daring to have a spine? That was the breaking point. The trust, what little was left, shattered completely. I'm done, I said quietly. Tell Dad. Tell Mom. Tell whoever you want. I'm not coming back. Ever. Michael raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? Positive. He smirked again. Fine. But don't come crawling back when you realize you need us. Then he left. When the door shut behind him, Larson looked over. You okay? I nodded slowly, though my hands were shaking. Yeah, I said. I just realized something. What's that? That they're not done yet. Because if I knew my father and brother at all, they'd try again. They always did. And next time, they'd make sure it hurt even more. And I wasn't going to let that happen. After Michael left the shop that day, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. Exhaustion from the emotional roller coaster of the past weeks. Relief because I'd finally set boundaries. Clear, non-negotiable boundaries. But also an underlying unease. They hadn't finished. I knew that much. My parents weren't the type to let something like this go. But I also realized something else. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. For the first time, I had a chance to build something purely for myself. The first few weeks were rough. My old clients trickled back, but there were gaps, losses, and frustrations. Supplies were expensive. The old van I'd relied on for transporting materials had a bad alternator. I had to spend days fixing it instead of working on jobs. Some nights, I went to bed hungry because I prioritized buying a replacement tool over dinner. Larson gave me a corner of his shop, but I was technically operating on borrowed time. My finances were tight, and my energy was stretched thin. I also had to navigate the emotional toll. Every time my phone buzzed with a text from Mom, my heart would tighten. Adam, we miss you. Please reconsider. Every email from Michael bragging about some small win in his landscaping business made my stomach twist. At first, I almost faltered. I questioned if leaving had been the right choice. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe I should have tried harder to make peace. But the thought of walking back into a house where my efforts had been sold, stolen, and erased, I couldn't. I realized I had to stop reacting. I had to stop letting their actions dictate my life. So I started planning quietly. I made a strict routine: work, sleep, work, repeat. I cataloged my old contacts, reconnected with local clients, and started offering small repair jobs, furniture fixes, machine tune-ups, minor renovations. Every job I completed built something tangible, something I could see and touch, unlike the digital destruction they'd inflicted. Every satisfied client was a small victory, a reminder that I could rebuild even if they tried to tear me down. Then came the first real spark of growth. One of my old clients, Mrs. Klein, owned a small cafe downtown. She'd hired me years ago to repair a broken espresso machine, and she remembered my work. She called me, asking if I could fix a batch of commercial mixers that had been acting up. I went over, worked late into the night, and left everything running perfectly. The next morning, she handed me a check that nearly made me dizzy. Not only was it more than my usual rate, but she told me she'd recommend me to her contacts. Within a week, 3 more small businesses reached out, asking for help. Slowly, my reputation began to rebuild. More jobs came in, larger ones too. I started making enough to rent a tiny workshop of my own, not ideal, but mine. I installed shelves, organized the tools I'd been able to buy, and set up a corner for my own designs. The small victories, the control over my own work, were intoxicating. I had a rhythm again, a sense of purpose that no one could take from me. At the same time, I quietly gathered information. I started checking the local business registry, keeping an eye on Michael's landscaping venture. It wasn't difficult. He'd left plenty of paper trails. Every contract, every invoice, every permit he filed was public record. I noted the patterns, the gaps in his work, the weak spots. Larson even joked, "Looks like you're learning detective work on the side." I smiled quietly, but didn't say much. I didn't need to. I was collecting data, watching the pieces fall into place. Financially, things began to improve faster than I expected. One day, I fixed an industrial coffee grinder for a small bakery chain. The owner was impressed, and within 2 weeks, I had a contract to maintain and repair all their equipment monthly. That was the turning point. Suddenly, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something scalable. I hired one assistant to help with smaller jobs. I started scheduling jobs efficiently, buying bulk materials, negotiating with suppliers. My bank account started growing steadily, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of stability. The emotional side of my recovery was slower. I had flashbacks of Dad selling my tools, of Michael smirking as if he had a claim to my life, of Mom telling me I was overreacting. Some nights, I'd lie awake, wondering if I'd ever feel completely safe from their interference. But I realized that safety wasn't going to come from them. It had to come from me. That understanding gave me a strange clarity. And then came the first moment of unexpected empowerment. One afternoon, I was walking past a construction supply store when I noticed a familiar truck outside. It was Dad's, and next to it, Michael was pacing with a clipboard, looking flustered. Curious, I lingered at the edge of the lot. They didn't see me at first. I overheard Michael talking to a supplier on the phone, sounding nervous. "Yes, Dad's backing me. I need those materials today." "No, I haven't finished the paperwork yet." "Okay, but I'll have it soon." It was then I noticed the tension in his voice, the first real sign that maybe, just maybe, their plan wasn't flawless. I stayed hidden, watching him fumble with invoices and delivery schedules. A part of me felt satisfaction, not for Schadenfreude's sake, but because it was proof that they weren't untouchable. They had weaknesses. Everyone did. Over the next few weeks, I continued my work, slowly expanding my business. I started documenting my projects meticulously, before and after photos, client testimonials, detailed invoices. I wanted a record that no one could delete, a shield against any attempt to undermine me. My confidence grew with every successful job, and I noticed something else changing: the quiet satisfaction of proving myself. I no longer measured my worth by their approval. Every tool I bought, every project I completed, Every penny I earned was mine alone. I also began networking strategically. Larson introduced me to a few clients who had bigger projects, and I treated each one as an opportunity to cement my reputation. I learned negotiation skills, marketing tricks, even a bit of accounting on the side. Slowly, I became more than a local repair guy. I was a small business owner with a growing reputation for reliability and skill. Emotionally, I was stronger too. I learned to recognize the manipulation and dismiss it before it affected me. Mom's texts still came occasionally, begging me to return or apologize. Michael still bragged about his progress, sometimes sending subtle jabs. Dad tried 1 or 2 week threats about calling the police or reporting my business as illegitimate. But I realized that none of it had power over me anymore. I had my own clients, my own income, my own space. I had autonomy, something they could never take back without breaking laws. And quietly, in the back of my mind, I started plotting, not revenge for the sake of cruelty, but a strategic reset. If I could operate in the open, rebuild my credibility, and gain enough influence, I could control the narrative. I could protect myself and, if necessary, ensure they could never interfere again. I didn't need to act immediately. I just needed to prepare. I needed patience, precision, and leverage. One evening, Larson asked me how I felt about the past few weeks. I told him honestly, exhausted, angry, but strangely alive. I feel like I've been blindfolded my whole life, I said, and now someone finally removed it. I'm seeing the world clearly for the first time. He nodded. Good. Keep that feeling. That clarity will take you further than you think. It did. Over the next months, I worked tirelessly. I expanded my small repair business into a proper workshop. I bought a delivery van, hired 2 more assistants, and started taking contracts I wouldn't have dared touch before. My name spread by word of mouth, and soon, I was receiving calls from clients in other towns. For the first time in my life, I was in control of my destiny. And the best part? They had no idea. Every success, every milestone, was mine alone. They couldn't brag about it, couldn't undermine it, couldn't steal it. I didn't gloat. I didn't post anything online. I just built, quietly, deliberately, until the foundation was solid. I knew one day my parents would hear about it. Michael would probably stumble across it eventually. But when that moment came, I would be ready. I would be prepared. And I wouldn't be the desperate, powerless kid they had left behind in that shed. Because for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was rising. And rising quietly, unseen, was far more powerful than they could ever imagine. But just as my confidence was solidifying, the next shock arrived. One that I hadn't expected, one that threatened to shake everything I had rebuilt. It started innocently enough, at least on the surface. Business was booming, my client list growing steadily, my little workshop humming with activity. I was finally feeling like I'd reached a level of stability where I could think beyond just surviving. And that's when I realized I needed leverage, not out of spite, but for protection and, yes, eventually for payback. I wasn't interested in petty revenge. I wanted something smart, strategic, and unshakable. Something that would make them realize that underestimating me had been their first mistake. I had always been careful with finances, meticulous with invoices, and diligent with documentation. But I hadn't realized how powerful that could be until an opportunity arose through Larson. He had been contracted for a large-scale renovation for a corporate client, someone who owned multiple franchises across the region. Larson was overbooked, so he offered me the chance to handle the secondary properties, big enough that I'd make real money, but under the radar. The contract required proof of insurance, business registration, tax documents, the works. For weeks, I prepared, ensuring everything was legitimate, above board, and fully traceable. I learned to manage employees, handle supply chains, and negotiate contracts. I even took a crash course in small business law at the local community center, learning the legal language and loopholes that could protect me. Every detail I learned wasn't just about growth, it was about power. If I could run a legitimate, successful business that couldn't be touched by them, I'd have the ultimate leverage. Then came the moment to apply it. One of Larson's clients, let's call him Mr. Whitman, needed a set of specialized repairs across 3 properties. Michael, as always, had boasted to Dad that his landscaping business could handle anything, and he was still using Dad's name as a shield for credibility. I saw my opening. I approached Mr. Whitman professionally, detailed the work I could do, and provided a fully licensed, insured, and verifiable proposal. I emphasized timelines, quality standards, and aftercare. Michael, in his usual overconfident style, tried to cold call the client using Dad's phone number, claiming to be the family expert. Whitman politely declined. Then I got the call. "Adam, we'd like you to take this on," he said. "We reviewed your proposal, and we're impressed with your professionalism. Let's start next week." I could feel the grin forming on my face, but I stayed calm. This wasn't a victory celebration. This was strategy in action. I now had a tangible win in a space my family thought they dominated. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the work. Each project was executed perfectly. I took photographs, recorded progress, and documented every step. I even started saving receipts and correspondence from Michael whenever he tried to interfere or undercut me. It was all evidence, quietly building a dossier that would one day become a weapon in my favor. The big turning point came when Larson casually mentioned an upcoming franchise conference. "You should come," he said. "Network a little. You might find some serious clients, people with money and influence." I took the suggestion seriously. I registered, prepared a portfolio, and arrived with my work displayed professionally. The conference was intimidating. People with large corporate names, slick presentations, and decades of experience, but I navigated it quietly. I didn't boast about being the kid whose tools were sold. I presented my achievements clearly, confidently, and calmly. And it worked. I gained 3 significant contracts on the spot, each one larger than anything Michael had ever claimed. Each one required upfront deposits, verified insurance, and formal contracts. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just ahead of my family. I was untouchable. They could no longer bully me, manipulate me, or claim authority over my work. Meanwhile, Michael and Dad were still operating on assumptions, still underestimating me. I had been tracking their projects quietly, watching Michael make mistakes, overpromising, underdelivering, missing deadlines. One evening, while reviewing his public filings, I noticed that one of his clients had left a negative review about an incomplete job. Perfect. A crack in the armor. I decided it was time to execute a calm, precise form of revenge, not rash, not loud, just effective. I contacted Michael's major supplier. I presented myself as a professional business owner with a verified contract needing a bulk supply of equipment. The supplier, convinced by my legitimacy and references, agreed to prioritize my order. Meanwhile, I subtly hinted at inconsistencies in Michael's account of past orders, enough to seed doubt without directly accusing him. Within days, Michael faced delays because the supplier was double-checking his accounts. His timeline slipped. His confidence faltered. Then I went one step further. I reached out to a few of Michael's major clients. I offered my services subtly, under the guise of being an independent specialist who could solve problems quickly. I didn't advertise that he had failed. I simply demonstrated competence and reliability. A few clients switched over quietly, no dramatic confrontation, no shouting matches, just lost opportunities for him. The irony was intoxicating. The next piece fell into place almost accidentally. Dad, of course, was still talking about me behind my back. One afternoon, Larson picked up a small tidbit while discussing his own business dealings. Dad had been bragging to a local contractor about Michael's supposed dominance in the landscaping market, casually disparaging me at every opportunity. I filed that mentally. That information, combined with the contracts I was securing and the clients I was absorbing, created a picture of controlled, quiet dominance. They didn't even know I was in the room, running circles around them. I also leveraged social proof carefully. I started accepting referrals from satisfied clients, letting word of mouth speak instead of any confrontation. My reputation grew quietly but solidly. By the end of the quarter, my business income had tripled compared to Michael's projected revenue. Dad had no idea. Michael was floundering, and Mom still called occasionally, pleading for reconciliation I had no intention of giving. The climax of this phase of my revenge came when I decided to attend a local business networking dinner. Michael and Dad were both present, naturally bragging about their successes. I arrived late, casually, not drawing attention. I shook hands, introduced myself professionally, and casually mentioned my business in conversations with several influential people in the room. By the end of the evening, 3 significant investors had expressed interest in contracting my services. Michael noticed, of course, and his expression shifted from smug confidence to unease as he realized I was operating at a level he couldn't match. I left the dinner quietly, no dramatic exit, no confrontation. But I could sense the ripple effect. The next week, Michael's clients began calling me directly for services he had promised. Some even mentioned hearing about me through other sources. Dad, still thinking he was in control, had no clue what was happening behind the scenes. By now, I wasn't just surviving. I was strategically dismantling the illusion of their dominance. Every move I made was calculated, every action deliberate. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't done anything rash. I had simply positioned myself in a way that made them powerless without any overt confrontation. And the best part? They didn't even see it coming. Michael was furious, of course, when he noticed the shift. Dad was in disbelief. Mom was frantic, still sending me texts about how proud they were and how they just wanted the family together again. None of it mattered. I wasn't interested in reconciliation. I was interested in equilibrium, and in making sure that the people who had treated me like a disposable asset could never threaten me again. By the end of that year, my business had grown beyond anything I could have imagined, and Michael's had plateaued. He made mistakes, missed deadlines, and became dependent on subcontractors, including me. Dad tried to lecture me about family loyalty, unaware that I now held the power he had tried to crush. I had quietly, methodically, and expertly turned the tables. And all it took was patience, preparation, and restraint. Every contract I signed, every client I gained, every step forward was both a personal victory and a strategic setup for the ultimate payoff, proving, without a doubt, that I was capable of standing on my own and thriving far beyond the reach of those who tried to control me. For the first time, I could breathe freely. I wasn't just free from their interference. I was empowered, untouchable, and completely in control. And while they thought they had the upper hand, I had already won, quietly, deliberately, and with a precision they would never see coming. But even as I built this empire, I knew the final confrontation was inevitable. Michael would falter further. Dad would make his next move. And I would be ready, not just to survive, but to execute the ultimate lesson they'd never forget. It didn't happen all at once. I didn't storm and screaming. I didn't announce myself like some dramatic hero in a movie. Everything I had built was carefully orchestrated to hit them where it hurt most, and they had no idea it was coming. By the time the final act played out, I was untouchable, untangled from their control, and calm, almost serene, in the face of the storm they had unknowingly invited. The first signs of fallout were subtle. Michael started noticing discrepancies in his invoices. Suppliers began asking him questions he hadn't anticipated. Did he actually order that equipment? Did he really pay for that bulk shipment? Questions that made him stammer and hedge, betraying the fact that he had been sloppy, overconfident, and unprepared. Meanwhile, my own accounts were pristine. Receipts, contracts, emails, all neatly archived, all verifiable, all legally unassailable. Then came the first domino. A local contractor who had once been Michael's client reached out to me. He'd tried to hire Michael for a landscaping job, and Michael had promised the world, but the work had been delayed for weeks. I stepped in, offered a solution, delivered perfect results, and quietly billed the client at a fair rate. That's when Michael realized the client preferred me over him, not because of family ties, not because of any flashy pitch, but because I had proven reliability. Word spread quickly. In a matter of weeks, I had taken over multiple accounts that Michael and Dad had assumed were theirs by default. Each transition was quiet, professional, and irreversible. Michael tried to salvage his reputation, but every client I picked up quietly increased my leverage while reducing his credibility. Dad called a few of his contacts, trying to reassure them that Adam would come around, only to discover that my business name, my contracts, and my reputation were now far more prominent in the local trade networks. The real blow came when I secured a regional contract that had been Michael's dream. A major property management company was looking for a reliable contractor to maintain all their rental properties. They wanted someone trustworthy, professional, and verifiable. Michael had applied, relying on his family name and bravado. I submitted my proposal, professional, fully documented, insured, and backed by months of verified work and client testimonials. The company awarded me the contract without hesitation. Michael didn't get a call back, and Dad's attempts to intervene were dismissed as irrelevant. By this point, the family realized that their attempts to undermine me had backfired spectacularly. Dad was the first to confront me. Well, indirectly. One afternoon, a neighbor who had been loosely connected to Dad's business called me, saying, "Your dad's talking about you. He's furious. Says you've outsmarted the entire family." I chuckled quietly, sipping my coffee, feeling the weight of months of meticulous planning paying off. Michael, on the other hand, had hit rock bottom. He had spent months bragging about his dominance, only to find clients slipping away, suppliers questioning him, and contracts quietly transferred under my management. He came to my workshop one day, red-faced and stammering. "Adam, we need to talk," he said. I leaned against the counter, calm. "We do? About what?" He hesitated. I don't understand how you're getting all these contracts. Dad says it's unfair. People are talking about it. About you." I smiled faintly. "I didn't cheat, Michael. I worked. I built something you underestimated. You were sloppy, and Dad encouraged it." He turned pale. "You're ruining me." "Dad will." "Michael," I said, cutting him off, "look at the facts. I left. You mocked me. You took my tools. Dad sold my property, deleted my accounts. I didn't retaliate with anger. I retaliated with preparation. Every move I made was legal, professional, and irreversible. You lost because you weren't careful, because you underestimated me. That's not my fault. It's yours." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, the reality sinking in. Every subtle jab he had thrown, every smug comment, every assumption that I would fail had been his undoing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't taunt him. I simply stated the facts, and those facts carried weight. Dad, of course, found out soon after. He called, trying to assert authority, his voice trembling with anger that had no power behind it. "Adam, you can't just—" "I can," I said evenly. "Legally, professionally, ethically. I didn't take anything from anyone that wasn't already mine to protect. And now, I'm thriving without you. You see, the difference between us is simple. I planned, you assumed. I built, you destroyed. I acted, you reacted. That's why I'm untouchable." There was silence on the other end, the kind of silence that carries the weight of realization. Dad's voice came out quieter, almost hesitant. You've outsmarted me." "I have," I confirmed. "And that's not up for debate." Mom tried one last plea, sending texts begging me to come home, forgive, and rebuild the family. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Their power over me was gone, their influence nullified. I had risen above their games, and nothing they did could change that. Michael, humiliated, eventually had to acknowledge defeat publicly. At a regional trade meeting, he tried to pitch a big landscaping contract to a new client. I was already the contractor they wanted. His excuses fell flat. The client didn't care about family loyalty, past promises, or appearances. They wanted results. I had built a reputation that couldn't be ignored, and Michael's failure was visible to everyone. The final fallout was almost poetic. Dad attempted to lecture me at a family gathering, confident that he could intimidate me with his voice and presence. I calmly listened, then outlined in simple, factual terms my business achievements, my contracts, my client satisfaction, and the documented proof of every step I had taken. By the end, the room was silent. The family who had once wielded authority like a weapon realized they no longer had any leverage, and for the first time, they saw me as fully independent, fully capable, and untouchable. Michael slumped in his chair, defeated and angry. while Mom's face reflected shock and disappointment. Dad, the man who had spent years defining himself through control, sat in stunned silence, unable to reconcile the reality of what had happened. He had thought his power was unassailable, his authority absolute. I had shattered both without raising my voice, without confrontation, without chaos. I had simply built, quietly and efficiently, until my strength was undeniable. Weeks later, I received a final, almost sheepish message from Dad. "We underestimated you. You've made your point." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The message itself was the acknowledgement I had waited for. My revenge had not been about anger. It had been about precision. Every move I made had been deliberate, calm, and measured. I hadn't destroyed them physically or publicly humiliated them. I had simply exposed the truth of their mismanagement, their overconfidence, and their assumptions. And in doing so, I had taken control of my own life, my own future, and my own destiny. Michael eventually left the town in frustration, attempting to salvage what little business he could elsewhere. Dad and Mom had to adjust to a new reality, one in which I operated independently, successfully, and without their interference. The shed, the tools, the insults, the condescension, all of it became irrelevant. What mattered was my growth, my stability, and my power. I sat in my workshop one evening, looking around at the equipment I had acquired, the contracts I had secured, the business I had built from nothing. The satisfaction wasn't in making them suffer. It was in knowing that I had risen above them, untouched by their toxicity. That was the true victory. And in that quiet moment, with the sun setting over the town and the hum of my workshop filling the space, I realized something fundamental. I wasn't just free. I wasn't just successful. I was untouchable. For the first time in my life, I smiled knowing that no one, no parent, no sibling, no entitled family member, could ever take that away from me. I had built my future. I had reclaimed my power. And I had done it on my own terms. The family who once dictated every part of my life now had only one choice: watch as I thrived, quietly, relentlessly, and unbreakable. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. I'm Tony, 32, and for most of my life, I've been labeled as the quiet one in the family, the one who doesn't cause trouble, doesn't argue, doesn't stand out. My parents, especially my mom, always said I was sensitive, which was their polite way of saying disappointment. I was the one who went into something safe but boring, according to them, a career in IT, while my older brother, Ryan, was the golden boy. He was charismatic, loud, always the center of attention, and no matter what he did, he had this way of making everyone believe he was extraordinary. Even when he messed up, my parents somehow turned it into a story of resilience. Me? If I made one small mistake, it was proof that I'd never had what it takes. It's funny how you grow up thinking that one day your family will finally see you for who you are, an adult, independent, capable. But some families never let go of the old roles. Every Thanksgiving, I hoped things would be different. I'd tell myself, maybe this year they'll just treat me like a person, not a disappointment wrapped in politeness. But this last Thanksgiving, it was the day I finally realized that I'd been fooling myself all along. The moment I walked into my parents' house, the air was thick with that usual blend of fake warmth and underlying tension. The smell of roasted turkey filled the house, and laughter came from the dining room. But when I stepped in, it quieted just slightly, just enough for me to notice. My mom's eyes flicked up, scanning me like she was checking if I'd dressed appropriately. My dad gave me that half smile that wasn't really a smile, more like a nod of acknowledgement. Ryan, of course, stood up with his glass raised. "Look who finally decided to show up," he said, grinning wide. Everyone laughed, even my aunt, who barely knew why. "Traffic," I said calmly, setting the dessert I brought, a homemade pie, on the counter. Figured I'd try to contribute. "Oh, Tony, you didn't have to do that," Mom said with a too bright smile. "You know baking isn't really your thing." I just smiled faintly. "Well, I managed." Ryan leaned against the counter beside her, eyeing the pie like it was an art project gone wrong. You sure it's edible this time? Remember last year's experiment? He laughed at his own joke, and Mom joined in, shaking her head fondly. They always did that. Laugh at me together, like it was harmless teasing. But when you grow up being the punchline, you start to realize the laughter isn't as innocent as it sounds. Dinner was the usual performance. My mom talking about how hard Ryan worked, my dad chiming in about Ryan's ambition, and Ryan sitting there soaking it all in, as if he'd earned every word. I sat quietly, listening, cutting my food into tiny pieces. Every time I tried to speak, someone interrupted. When I mentioned that my company had promoted me to a senior position, my mom barely blinked. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, before turning to Ryan. "Didn't your firm just give you another bonus?" He nodded smugly. "Yeah, I'm basically managing the whole department now." It was a lie. I knew it because I'd heard through a mutual friend that Ryan had been reprimanded at work for missing deadlines. But my parents never verified anything he said. They just believed him. Because that's what Ryan did. He told stories, and they swallowed them whole. I sat there smiling, nodding, doing what I always did, pretending it didn't bother me. Pretending I didn't notice how my dad only asked Ryan questions, how my mom leaned toward him like he was a celebrity guest. I'd grown used to fading into the background. But something about that night felt different. There was this undercurrent, a cruel excitement in the air that I couldn't quite place. Then came the toast. My dad stood, his glass raised, and said, "Let's all give thanks for another wonderful year together." Everyone lifted their glasses. "To family," he said. "To family," they echoed. But Ryan wasn't done. He grinned, stood up with exaggerated confidence, and said, "Actually, I've got one more toast." The room quieted a bit, curious. "Here's to Mom's favorite," he said, looking directly at me. "Still the family's biggest failure." For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. Then I saw the smirks around the table, my aunt's awkward laugh, my dad's amused exhale, my mom covering her mouth like she was embarrassed but entertained. "Ryan," Mom said in that fake scolding tone, but she was smiling. "What?" Ryan said innocently. "It's just a joke. Tony knows I'm kidding, right?" I stared at him for a long second. My fork rested halfway between my plate and my mouth. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed calm. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Sure." I took another bite of turkey and looked around the table, really looking this time, at all of them. They weren't just laughing, they were enjoying it. Even Dad. That was the moment something inside me clicked. I realized that nothing I'd ever done, or could do, would change how they saw me. And for the first time, instead of trying to fix it, I just accepted it. I nodded slowly, swallowed my bite, and thought, enjoy this. It's the last time I'll sit at this table. After dinner, while everyone was in the living room, I excused myself early. "Got some work tomorrow," I said. No one protested. Ryan just called out, "Don't stay up all night coding, little bro." I smiled politely, grabbed my coat, and left. The cold air outside felt like freedom. I walked to my car, started the engine, and just sat there for a minute, staring at the house through the windshield. I should have been angry, but I wasn't. I just felt done. That night, when I got home, I pulled out the envelope sitting in my desk drawer, the one from my late grandmother's lawyer. She'd left behind a modest inheritance to be split between Ryan and me, but there was a clause. We both had to sign the release form together to access it. My parents had been pressuring me for months to hurry up and sign, saying Ryan had plans for the money. I'd been stalling, saying I wanted time to review the terms. Now, sitting there under the soft hum of my desk lamp, I finally understood why I'd been hesitating. A week later, the call came. It was Ryan. His voice was unusually tight. "Hey, Tony. Just wondering, did you sign those inheritance papers yet?" I glanced at the envelope on my desk, the unbroken seal, and felt a slow, calm smile spread across my face. "Not yet," I said. He exhaled sharply. "You need to, man. The lawyer's been trying to finalize everything, and Mom's getting frustrated. We can't move forward until you do." "Oh," I said casually, leaning back in my chair. "So you need me now? What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said softly. "Just funny timing, that's all." He started to say something else, but I cut him off. I'll think about it. And before he could reply, I hung up. Then I picked up the papers from my desk, ran my thumb over the crisp edges, and smirked to myself. They wanted to laugh at me, to treat me like the family failure? Fine. But they were about to find out what happens when the quiet one decides he's had enough. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew one thing for certain. This time, the story wouldn't end with me walking away quietly. It would end with them realizing that they should have never underestimated me. And that thought alone was enough to make me sit back, take a slow breath, and start planning. The next few days after Thanksgiving were oddly quiet. No calls from Mom, no texts from Dad, not even a snide meme from Ryan. He loved sending those passive-aggressive family jokes about being the responsible sibling, while I was the one still figuring it out. But this time, nothing. Just silence. And I didn't mind it one bit. I focused on work, logged long hours, and kept my mind off the Thanksgiving humiliation. But then, the quiet ended. One afternoon, as I was closing my laptop, my phone buzzed with a message from Mom. We're having a family dinner Sunday. Don't be late this time. No question mark, no greeting. Just an order. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But part of me wanted to see where this was heading. They were probably going to pressure me again about the inheritance. So I decided to go, but on my terms. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to explain or defend myself. I was going to listen, watch, and take mental notes. When I arrived Sunday evening, Ryan's new car was parked right out front, a shiny black SUV that I knew he couldn't afford. He must have either taken out another loan or convinced my parents to help him again. Inside, the atmosphere was the same as always. My mom fluttering around the kitchen, my dad sitting in his usual spot with the TV on, pretending not to notice how loud everyone was. Ryan leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone, clearly waiting for me. "Tony," Mom greeted, her tone clipped but polite. "Glad you could make it. You're early." "Yeah," I said, hanging my coat. Didn't want to miss the family meeting. Ryan looked up, smirking. "Meeting? Oh, come on, don't make it sound so serious." Mom gave him a little look that said, "Let me handle this," and turned to me. "Actually, we did want to discuss something important," she said sweetly. "It's about Grandma's inheritance." There it was. I took a seat, folded my hands, and waited. "You know your grandmother always wanted the best for you boys," Mom began, her voice syrupy with fake tenderness. "And she trusted you to be responsible with her gift. But Ryan has an opportunity, one that could benefit everyone if we act quickly." Ryan jumped in. "Yeah, my friend's starting a new real estate investment group, and I could get in early if we free up the funds now. But the lawyer says he can't release the money until you sign." I leaned back, studying him. "So it's not for everyone. It's for you." Mom sighed, as if I were being deliberately difficult. "Tony, don't be petty. Ryan has a plan. You've always said you weren't in a rush to use the money." Dad finally spoke, his voice low and dismissive. "Your brother's actually doing something productive with his share. You could learn from that. By giving him mine." I asked quietly. My mom gave me that sharp look she used when I was a teenager, the one that meant, "Don't push it." "You're not giving him anything," she said quickly. "You'd both benefit if his investment pays off. And if it doesn't?" I asked. Ryan shrugged, smiling too confidently. "It will. Don't be negative." I sat there for a moment, letting the silence stretch. They thought they were cornering me, the same way they always did, pressuring, guilt-tripping, manipulating. But this time, I wasn't the same person sitting quietly, trying to earn approval. "I'll think about it," I said calmly, standing up. "But I'm not signing anything yet." Mom's smile faltered. "Tony, don't make this difficult. We're just trying to help Ryan get ahead." "Then maybe he should do it on his own," I said, walking toward the door. Behind me, Ryan muttered something under his breath, and Dad's voice rose. "Don't you walk out in the middle of a discussion, son." I turned, meeting his eyes. "That's exactly what I'm doing." And I left. That night, I sat on my couch replaying the entire evening in my head. The tone, the expressions, the rehearsed concern. It wasn't new. It was just clearer now. My whole life, I've been the safety net for Ryan's failures, the background character in my own story. And they didn't even hide it anymore. Over the next week, the messages started coming in one after another. "Mom, Ryan's getting anxious. Can you just be reasonable and sign? Dad, you're holding up family business for no reason. Ryan, dude, stop being dramatic. It's just money. I ignored them all. Then, on Thursday, I came home to find my dad's car parked in my driveway. He was sitting on my front porch, arms crossed. That was unusual. He rarely came over unless it was something serious. When I stepped out of my car, he stood. "We need to talk," he said. Inside, he didn't even sit down. "Your mother's upset," he began. "You embarrassed her by storming out." "I didn't storm out," I said evenly. "I left when the conversation became one-sided." He frowned. "You're being selfish. That inheritance could make a big difference for this family." "For Ryan, you mean?" "For all of us," he snapped. "Your brother's been struggling, and instead of helping, you're making it harder." I stared at him. "So I'm responsible for his bad decisions now?" Dad's expression hardened. "You wouldn't understand. Ryan's always had more drive, more charisma. If he had a bit of your stability and you had a bit of his ambition, maybe you'd both be better off." I actually laughed. "You mean if I had his recklessness and he had my work ethic?" His eyes flashed with irritation. "You always twist everything." "No," I said quietly. "I just finally see things clearly." He didn't like that answer. He muttered something about ingratitude and left soon after, slamming the door behind him. I sat there for a while, staring at the closed door, feeling this strange mix of anger and calm. For once, I wasn't doubting myself. I wasn't replaying the argument, wondering if I'd gone too far. Because deep down, I knew I was right. Still, the situation wasn't over. It never was with them. 2 days later, Ryan showed up unannounced. I was in the middle of fixing something on my computer when I heard the knock. When I opened the door, he was standing there, smiling like nothing had happened. "Bro," he said, stepping inside before I could answer. "Why are you being so uptight about this? We could both benefit if I invest first." I crossed my arms. "What's in it for me?" He blinked, caught off guard. "Well, the profits, obviously. Which I'm supposed to trust you'll share?" He sighed. "Come on, man, don't be like that. I'm your brother." "That's exactly the problem." He frowned, the fake charm slipping. "You've always been jealous, you know that? Ever since we were kids. You think I don't notice how you sit there, judging me?" "Jealous?" I repeated quietly. "You think I'm jealous of you?" He smirked. "You've always wanted what I had. Attention, confidence, the ability to actually make things happen. But you never had the guts." I laughed softly. "Ryan, I don't want your life. I just don't want to keep cleaning up after it." That hit a nerve. His smile dropped. "You're going to regret this," he said, his voice lower now. "Mom and Dad aren't going to forget how you're treating them." "I'll take my chances," I said, walking to the door and opening it. He hesitated, clearly wanting the last word. "You've always been the weak one, Tony. Always will be." I didn't respond. I just held the door until he finally left. That night, though, I couldn't help but think about his words. Not because I believed them, but because it was so typical. Whenever Ryan couldn't get his way, he attacked. Whenever my parents couldn't manipulate, they guilt. It was the same pattern, over and over. But something about this time felt different. They weren't just trying to get me to sign some papers. They were trying to remind me of my place. And I'd already decided I wasn't going back to that. The next morning, I called the lawyer who handled my grandmother's estate. "I have some questions about the inheritance terms," I said. "Specifically about what happens if only one heir signs." The lawyer explained everything carefully, confirming what I'd suspected. Without my signature, the money couldn't be released. And if Ryan tried to force the issue, it would become a legal matter. That knowledge gave me a quiet kind of satisfaction. Not vindictive, just steady, controlled relief. I wasn't powerless anymore. That weekend, I got another call, Mom again. This time, her tone was different. Softer, careful. "Tony, honey," she began. "I think we may have misunderstood each other. Ryan didn't mean to make you feel pressured." I stayed silent. "I just think," she continued, "that if you really love this family, you'd want to help your brother get on his feet. He's had a harder time than you think." I closed my eyes and exhaled. "You mean the time he got fired for missing deadlines? Or when he spent his bonus on a car he couldn't afford?" Her pause was long. "That's not fair. He's trying." "So am I," said. "But you never noticed." "Tony," she said softly, her voice almost trembling now. You've always been so cold. Your father and I worry about you. You isolate yourself, you hold grudges. I stopped her. Mom, I'm not isolating myself. I'm protecting myself. There was silence on the line. Then, quietly, she said, if your grandmother could see this, she'd be disappointed. I felt something in my chest tighten, but I didn't let it show. If Grandma were here, I said, she'd tell you to stop using her memory to manipulate me. I hung up. That was the moment I realized they weren't going to stop. They would twist, guilt, and push until I either gave in or walked away completely. And for the first time in my life, I knew which one I was going to choose. But before I could take that step, something else happened, something that shifted everything. A week later, Ryan called me again, his voice sharp and panicked. Tony, you didn't sign over the inheritance, did you? I looked down at the sealed envelope still sitting on my desk, untouched. I smiled slowly. No, I said. What? Why not? He stammered. You don't understand. We've got a problem. But before he could finish, I interrupted. Relax, Ryan. I know exactly what I'm doing. He was breathing heavily on the other end, clearly desperate. Tony, you don't get it. If you don't sign. I glanced at the papers, at my signature line still blank, and felt a deep, quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. I'll think about it, I said, my tone calm but deliberate. And this time, I truly meant it. Because I knew that whatever panic had made him call like that, it meant something had gone wrong. The week after Ryan's panic call was the first time I felt a creeping, uncomfortable tension that wasn't just about the inheritance. It was the realization that I'd underestimated how far my family would go to get what they wanted. I'd always known they were manipulative, but this was something else entirely. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even discreet. It was an outright display of how far they could betray me and still call it family responsibility. It started with small things. Mom texting late at night, trying to guilt me with subtle reminders. Ryan is worried, Tony. Don't you care about the family? Dad calling incessantly during work hours, pretending to check in while hammering me with arguments about loyalty, responsibility, and how I was letting everyone down. Every time I picked up, I could hear Ryan in the background, laughing, coaching them, almost enjoying the show. He knew exactly what buttons to push, and it was sickening. I refused to engage, just as I had after Thanksgiving. But I could feel their patience thinning, their tolerance for my stubbornness fading. That was when the email started. Long, carefully worded messages from Mom and Dad, often CC&G Ryan, detailing how the family could suffer if I didn't sign the inheritance papers. Each email was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation, reminders of sacrifices made for me, lists of opportunities one had wasted, and, of course, praise for Ryan's achievements. It was relentless. Then came the phone call I wasn't expecting, my grandmother's lawyer. Mr. Tony, she said, her tone calm but slightly hesitant. I need to inform you of a development. There's been an attempt to move your inheritance without your consent. My heart stopped. What do you mean? It appears that Ryan submitted some forms to access the funds. The signatures were forged, she said slowly, like the words themselves were difficult to speak. I haven't filed anything yet, but if this were real, it could become a criminal matter. I sank into my chair, gripping the edge of the desk. Forged signatures? I had known they were manipulative. I'd even expected them to pressure me endlessly. But this was a level of betrayal I hadn't imagined. Has anyone contacted the authorities? I asked, my voice tight. Not yet, she said. I wanted to speak with you first. You're the only one authorized to take action here. I ended the call and stared at the envelope on my desk. My inheritance wasn't just being used against me. It was being stolen. The realization hit me like a punch. Everything, the taunts, the fake concern, the pressure, they were all a prelude to this. And it was Ryan. Of course it was Ryan. My parents had always backed him, but I'd never thought he'd go this far. Not legally, not criminally. The next day, I confronted him. He answered the phone with his usual smirk. Hey, Tony, did you think about signing yet? I know what you did, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. The lawyer called. You tried to forge my signature. There was a pause. Then he laughed, low and nervous. Oh, come on. You think I'd do something like that? That's crazy. I have proof waiting to be filed with the authorities if you deny it, I said steadily. Do you really want this to go that far? Tony, you're overreacting. I don't know what you're talking about, he said quickly, the charm slipping. You're making this into a bigger deal than it is. Mom and Dad would never approve of you accusing me of something like that. Mom and Dad don't matter, I said, the fury rising slowly but steadily. What matters is that you broke the law and betrayed every ounce of trust between us. The line went silent for a long moment. Then, with a bitter laugh, he said, You've always been the cautious one, the one who thinks rules matter. I guess that's why you'll always be the failure in the family's eyes. I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. He had spent our entire lives making me feel small, and now he was daring to attack me in the only place I had any control, my grandmother's legacy. The betrayal was sharp and deep, a twisting knife I couldn't ignore. I didn't respond. I hung up and immediately called the lawyer back, instructing her to hold all funds, document the attempted forgery, and prepare legal measures to protect my share. I wanted Ryan to feel consequences, and this time, I wouldn't let fear or guilt stop me. Over the next few days, the dynamic in the family escalated. Mom began texting constantly, her tone shifting between faux sweetness and simmering desperation. Tony, please, we're just trying to keep the family together. Ryan didn't mean any harm. I didn't respond. Dad tried his usual combination of intimidation and appeals to loyalty. He showed up at my office under the pretense of checking in, and even tried to corner me in the parking garage to talk things through. I stayed calm, asked him to leave, and watched as he stormed off muttering about ingratitude. Ryan, meanwhile, became erratic. He called, left voicemails, even tried showing up at my apartment. Once, I opened the door to him leaning casually against the doorframe, grinning. Come on, Tony, he said. We don't have to make this awkward. Just sign, and it's over. I'm not signing anything, I said, stepping forward. You're ridiculous, he shot back, voice rising. Do you have any idea how much you're hurting the family? Mom's upset, Dad's frustrated. You're making everything harder for them. I'm protecting myself from you, I said firmly, and I won't apologize for it. He scowled, but before he could respond, I shut the door, leaving him staring at the empty hallway. That night, I replayed the last decade of my life in my mind. Every joke, every snide remark, every slight favor he received while I was ignored. Every time my parents smiled at him and turned away from me. And now, this, an actual forgery, an attempt to steal something that belonged to me. It wasn't just the act itself. It was the clear, undeniable message. I didn't matter. Not my opinions, not my boundaries, not my dignity. Everything I had worked for, everything I had been careful to build, could be taken away with a pinch stroke and a bit of collusion. The next morning, I got a knock at my door. I opened it to see my lawyer standing there, holding a file. Mr. Tony, she said, I need to show you something. She laid the papers on my table, Ryan's attempted forged signatures, a copy of the submission he'd tried to make, and email chains showing him coaching my parents to encourage me in his signing quickly. The evidence was undeniable. The betrayal was not only real, it was calculated. I felt something inside me shift. Until now, I'd been patient, holding back, giving them chances, hoping maybe they'd come around or act like decent human beings. But this was beyond manipulation. This was a conscious decision to steal from me, to break every boundary I had set, to turn my own family into accomplices in a crime. And suddenly, all the anger, all the hurt, all the years of quiet suffering became fuel. Every insult, every dismissive comment, every forced laugh at Thanksgiving, they all boiled up inside me. I wasn't just upset. I wasn't just frustrated. I was seeing clearly for the first time exactly how toxic and entitled they were, and how much they had underestimated me. I sat back, staring at the papers. Ryan had thought he could get away with it. Mom had thought she could manipulate me into signing without realizing I was aware. Dad had assumed he could intimidate me into compliance. They were all wrong. For the first time, I felt a sense of power. Not revenge yet, Not really, but clarity. And with clarity comes planning. I knew that the next move would have to be precise. Legal measures, documentation, and timing were critical. I couldn't just react emotionally. I had to strike in a way that would leave them no room to argue, no chance to manipulate. And yet, as I looked at the forged signatures, the calculated messages, and the desperate calls from Ryan, a small, sinister part of me couldn't help but imagine the satisfaction when the truth came out. When they realized that the one they had always mocked, the one they had always dismissed, was now fully in control of the situation. After discovering Ryan's forgery, I thought the storm would hit immediately, but it didn't. For a while, all I had was silence. It was as if the universe had paused, waiting for me to make the first move. I tried to go about my normal routine, focusing on work, exercising, and keeping a low profile, but the emotional weight was heavy. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the sting of being not just underestimated, but attacked by the people who were supposed to care about me the most. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory of family dinners, holidays, and conversations, each one now tainted by the clarity that they'd never valued me. I won't lie, it hurt. It hurt in a way I hadn't let myself feel in years. For decades, I'd absorbed their jokes, their favoritism, their subtle dismissals, telling myself it didn't matter, that I was strong enough to rise above it. But this, Ryan's audacity, my parents' enabling, was the breaking point. I realized just how small and powerless I had felt all my life, how much I'd buried my own needs and opinions to avoid conflict. For a few days, I let myself sink into that pain. I stopped replying to texts, ignored the calls, even turned down dinner invitations. I wanted to feel the emptiness, the betrayal, to let it settle into my bones so I could understand it fully. It was during one of those long nights that I had a moment of clarity. I realized that wallowing in anger wouldn't help me, not truly. I couldn't change them, and I couldn't make them see me the way I deserved. But I could change myself. I could walk away from the toxicity, yes, but I could also turn the situation into something I controlled. That realization was like a spark. Pain had given me focus. Betrayal had given me resolve. I started quietly. First, I set strict boundaries. No more unannounced visits. No more emotional blackmail via calls or texts. I blocked Ryan's constant messages on my phone, redirected my parents' emails to a folder I rarely checked, and stopped answering calls from the extended family who only passed along Ryan's commentary. I didn't make a scene. I didn't argue. I simply took control of what I allowed into my life. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. Then came work. I immersed myself in projects I had delayed for months, focusing on skill development, leadership opportunities, and networking. My work performance skyrocketed. It was almost ironic. After years of being seen as quiet and unambitious, I became indispensable at my company. I was offered a promotion to a managerial position I hadn't expected, one that came with authority, respect, and a noticeable salary increase. For the first time, I wasn't being compared to Ryan. I was recognized on my own merits. I savored that quietly, not for ego, but because it was validation that I could succeed without anyone's approval. Alongside my professional growth, I worked on myself personally. I picked up hobbies I'd long ignored, spent more time exercising, and even traveled for a week to a quiet mountain cabin, disconnecting entirely from the family drama. Those moments alone, free from the constant barrage of judgment and comparison, were restorative. I realized I had spent so long trying to earn their approval that I'd neglected my own happiness. Despite all this, the inheritance situation lingered in the back of my mind. I didn't act impulsively. I let it sit, observing. I spoke with my lawyer regularly, discussing contingencies and legal strategies. I knew I had leverage, but I didn't rush. Power, I realized, was most effective when measured, precise, and undeniable. Ryan's desperation, my parents' manipulations, all of it would eventually come to light, but only when I was ready. The turning point came quietly, in one of the most ordinary moments. I was walking home from work on a crisp autumn evening, earbuds in, listening to nothing in particular, when I saw a small cafe I'd never noticed before. Inside, the owner was struggling, a few tables empty, paperwork scattered across the counter. Something about it spoke to me. A project, a challenge, an opportunity to create something of my own without anyone's interference. I went inside, struck up a conversation with the owner, and within a week, I had made arrangements to help him streamline operations, modernize the business, and eventually invest. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I was building something independent, something they couldn't touch or belittle. Life started to improve in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had financial security I controlled, a growing professional reputation, and a sense of self-respect I'd never experienced in the family environment. The more I focused on my life, the less the family's toxicity weighed on me. I started to see them for what they were: people whose approval I didn't need, people who thrived on control and manipulation, and people who would never respect boundaries or recognize my worth. Yet, even as I built my own life, the shadows of betrayal lingered. Ryan continued to call occasionally, his tone increasingly desperate, though he never mentioned the inheritance outright after the forgery exposure. My parents oscillated between feigned concern and passive-aggressive messaging, but their attempts to draw me back and became less frequent. They knew they were losing control. That knowledge gave me a quiet satisfaction, though I didn't flaunt it. I wasn't interested in petty revenge at this stage. I was interested in building, in strengthening my position, and in watching their influence over me crumble. During this period, I also reconnected with friends I had long neglected, people who had witnessed my family's favoritism and had supported me in small ways. Their encouragement, their validation, became another source of strength. I realized that the love and recognition I had been chasing from my family could be found elsewhere, and often, it was more genuine, more unconditional. A few months in, I was at a point where my personal and professional lives were flourishing in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. The cafe project was thriving. My promotion at work gave me authority and influence, and I had established a clear boundary between myself and my family. I was no longer reacting to their manipulation. I was anticipating it, and I was ready for the moment when action would be necessary. It was during a quiet evening, sitting in my apartment with a view of the city lights, that I realized something crucial: the power had shifted. For decades, my family had believed I was weak, passive, and easily swayed. They had underestimated me at every turn. But now, the quiet one, the one they called a failure, had control over the very thing they had tried to steal from me. I had resources, knowledge, and a plan. And most importantly, I had patience. That patience would be key. I didn't want impulsive revenge. I wanted precision, timing, and impact. I would not just assert myself. I would reshape the dynamic entirely. Every insult, every act of favoritism, every betrayal had been cataloged and internalized. They had unknowingly equipped me with the insight and motivation to turn the tables. And then came the day that made everything tangible. I received an email from my grandmother's lawyer. Ryan had sent another message, this time through his own attorney, claiming that I was deliberately obstructing the release of funds and threatening legal action. The desperation in his tone was palpable even through the formal language. I smiled quietly, reading it over and over. He didn't know how carefully I had prepared for this, how thoroughly I had documented everything, or how patient I had been while building my own power quietly in the background. I realized, in that moment, that the rock bottom I had experienced, the betrayal, the manipulation, the isolation, had been a necessary crucible. It had forced me to focus, to grow, to strategize, and to rise. They had pushed me to the edge, and instead of breaking, I had emerged stronger, more capable, and more independent than they had ever imagined possible. And I knew, without a doubt, that the next time I interacted with them, the balance of power would be unmistakably mine. Every insult, every attempt to undermine me, every joke at my expense, they had been training for this moment. I wasn't going back to being the quiet one. I wasn't going to argue or beg or explain. I had what I needed, and I was ready. Yet, as I sat there, savoring the calm before the storm, I also knew that the final act hadn't yet been played. Ryan was panicked, my parents were manipulative as ever, and the family dynamic still simmered beneath the surface. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to them. I was waiting, observing, and preparing. And when the moment came, I would move. Because they had underestimated me for the last time. It started quietly, the way most significant shifts do, almost imperceptibly. By the time I realized how much ground I had gained, I had already positioned myself in a place my family would never have expected. I wasn't just Tony, the quiet one, the failure they laughed at over Thanksgiving turkey. I was Tony, the one with the leverage, the knowledge, and, most importantly, the patience to wait for the perfect moment. The key had been strategy, not anger. After the forgery attempt and the series of manipulations, I realized that anything reactive would only give them ammunition. They thrived on chaos, on drama, on the opportunity to twist guilt and emotion to their favor. So I started planning carefully, in the background, with absolute discretion. My lawyer was briefed not just on the inheritance, but on every potential move they could make. Every document was cross-checked, every communication cataloged, and every interaction with Ryan or my parents was recorded, literally and figuratively, to ensure that the next time they tried anything, they would have no room to maneuver. Meanwhile, I expanded my personal power quietly. The cafe project I had stumbled upon months earlier had grown into something significant. I wasn't just investing in it. I was running it, modernizing it, transforming a failing little shop into a thriving business with a steady clientele. What had begun as a distraction from family drama had become proof of my capabilities, something tangible and independent that no one could take from me. I also leveraged my position at work, earning respect from colleagues and leadership, expanding my influence in ways that made it nearly impossible for Ryan or my parents to belittle me professionally. I even began cultivating subtle connections outside the obvious. I networked strategically, made introductions for people I trusted, and began quietly building a circle of support and influence. None of this was visible to my family. They still saw me as the background character, the one who didn't matter. It was perfect. Let them think I was passive. Let them assume they still held the upper hand. And then came the opportunity. It was a simple invitation at first, a casual family gathering under the guise of celebrating Ryan's new success. I knew instantly it was designed to pressure me again, perhaps even guilt me into finally signing the inheritance over. But this time I was ready. I arrived calmly, dressed sharply, radiating the quiet confidence that came from finally knowing my worth. Ryan immediately noticed, his smirk faltering for a split second. He tried to hide it with his usual bravado, but the subtle shift in my demeanor didn't escape him. Mom's eyes widened just slightly, as if she were suddenly aware that this wasn't the same Tony she'd been mocking all these years. Dad, predictably, tried to maintain his stern, patriarchal posture, but there was tension there too, a tiny crack in the armor of their assumptions. The gathering began as expected, polite conversation, Ryan subtly boasting about his achievements, Mom highlighting how proud she was of him, and Dad chiming in with that familiar combination of praise and condescension. I listened, nodded politely, and let them talk. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I didn't react emotionally. Instead, I observed. Every word, every gesture, every attempt to manipulate me was cataloged mentally, every micro-expression noted. Then it was time. I asked casually, almost offhandedly, "So, Ryan, did you happen to submit those inheritance papers again?" The room froze. Ryan's eyes darted nervously, his smile slipping. Mom's hand went to her mouth, the color draining from her face. Dad cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. I, I don't know what you mean," Ryan stammered. I smiled faintly. The attempt to forge my signature, of course. The one that could have become a criminal matter. Remember that. Ryan's mouth opened, closed, and opened again, but no words came out. He looked around at the table for support, but there was none. My parents, who usually swooped in to mediate, were silent, their faces betraying shock and perhaps a first real glimpse of fear. I leaned back, calm, deliberate. It's fascinating how quickly panic sets in when a plan doesn't go as expected. Mom finally found her voice. Tony, please, this isn't the place. No, Mom, I interrupted gently. It is the place. Because you've all been operating under the assumption that I would continue to let you belittle me, manipulate me, and even break the law without consequences. But that assumption was a mistake. Ryan tried to interject. Tony, come on, it was just a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, I said, voice measured. Forged signatures aren't misunderstandings. Coaching my parents to pressure me? Not a misunderstanding. Mocking me at every opportunity? Not a misunderstanding. What you've all done is calculated. And I've documented everything. I pulled a folder from my briefcase and set it on the table. The weight of it seemed to make the air denser. Inside were copies of emails, recordings, and notes, all meticulously organized. This, I said, tapping the folder lightly, represents every attempt to undermine me, every manipulation, every act of entitlement you've relied on for years. Every single one of you is implicated if this escalates legally. Ryan's face went pale. He stammered, tried to smile, tried to deflect, but it was useless. For once, he wasn't in control. Mom's hand shook slightly as she reached for the folder, but I stopped her with a gentle shake of my head. No, this is mine. And it's not just evidence, it's leverage. You've had the power to define me for decades, and now the power has shifted. I paused, letting the words settle. I've built a life you can't touch, Ryan. I've gained professional respect, financial independence, and a reputation based entirely on my own merit. And I've done it quietly, while you and Mom and Dad spent all your energy underestimating me. My parents exchanged glances, Mom's lips pressed thin, Dad's jaw tight. Ryan's bravado crumbled entirely. Now, I continued, I'm going to make something very clear. The inheritance is not going to Ryan, not until there is absolute transparency, accountability, and respect. And I will not tolerate further manipulation. You've had your chance. I watched the shift at the table, the subtle but undeniable recognition that I was no longer the powerless sibling. My calm, measured delivery, coupled with the undeniable evidence, had completely reversed the dynamic. No more jokes, no more casual dismissals, no more unearned authority. They had been forced to confront a reality they had refused to acknowledge for decades. Ryan's voice was low, almost pleading. Tony, we can work this out. Please, just sign. I already told you, I said, leaning back with a slight, controlled smile. I will decide when and how any of this moves forward. And if you think panic or threats will change that, you're sorely mistaken. I watched as the room fell silent. The power wasn't just mine legally or financially, it was psychological. They were seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time. And it wasn't the timid, quiet Tony they'd tried to mold and manipulate. This was someone who had endured, observed, planned, and finally acted with precision. Over the next hour, the conversation shifted subtly. They tried to negotiate, to reason, to charm, but every tactic failed. I responded calmly, never raising my voice, never losing control, never giving in. Each attempt to manipulate was met with polite, firm boundaries. Each feigned outrage was met with calm acknowledgement. Each guilt trip was deflected with reason. The balance of power had shifted entirely, and they knew it. By the end of the evening, I left the house with the same quiet satisfaction I had felt months ago when I first realized I was done letting them control me. But this time, it was different. This time, I had executed a plan, and the consequences were undeniable. I wasn't just walking away. I was walking away in control, with authority, with power, and with a future completely untainted by their toxicity. The knowledge that I had turned the tables, that I had taken what they thought was weakness and transformed it into strength, filled me with a sense of satisfaction I had never experienced before. The quiet one, the failure in their eyes, had finally become the one in control. And this was only the beginning. By the time the fallout hit, it wasn't dramatic or chaotic in the way Ryan or my parents might have imagined. There were no screaming matches, no doors slamming, no public spectacles. The power of what had unfolded lay in the quiet, unshakable shift in dynamics, and the way it slowly and irrevocably settled in their minds. The first sign of real impact came a week later. I was at the cafe, reviewing a spreadsheet with the owner, when my phone buzzed with a notification. Ryan had sent another email. I opened it cautiously, expecting the usual mix of panic and empty threats. But this one was different. It was terse, clipped, almost apologetic in tone, though clearly forced. I'll wait for your instructions regarding the inheritance. I understand your position. It was a strange mix of relief and disgust reading it. Relief because I knew he'd realized the fight was over. Disgust because it took him so long to understand the consequences of his own actions. And yet, beneath the surface, I knew this was just the tip of the iceberg. My parents were the ones who would feel the real effects. Within days, it became apparent that Mom and Dad were reeling, though they tried to keep appearances. I didn't make calls. I didn't confront them directly. I simply continued living my life, quietly and deliberately. And the consequences found them in the ways I hadn't even needed to orchestrate. Mom began noticing that her influence over social circles, family friends, and even extended relatives had eroded. People who had once eagerly supported her overreach now hesitated, unsure if her judgment or intentions could be trusted. Small comments reached her through the grapevine. Friends remarking on how Tony seems more in control than ever or seems unstoppable in his career. That left her unsettled. The same woman who had once subtly orchestrated manipulation at family events now found herself unable to command attention, forced instead into observing someone she had dismissed for decades. Dad, on the other hand, began feeling the professional and personal sting. Word got out quietly within his own social and business circles that his family's affairs were not handled transparently and that his favorite son, Ryan, had attempted to engage in forgery to access family money. The embarrassment was subtle at first, small glances, hushed conversations at events where he used to be authoritative and confident. Then came the calls from colleagues, gentle but pointed inquiries about whether he had really been aware of Ryan's actions, whether oversight had failed. He tried to wave it off, but the seed of doubt had been planted. In professional settings where he once thrived, that doubt grew quietly, undermining the gravitas he had always relied upon. Ryan was the most obvious casualty. Once the realization hit that his usual tactics, bravado, manipulation, charm, were ineffective, he became visibly nervous around extended family and mutual friends. No longer did his usual jokes land or earn him admiration. People treated him cautiously, aware that he had attempted something unethical. Even Mom and Dad, who had been his cheerleaders for decades, had begun to subtly distance themselves, unsure if they should continue defending him. The arrogance that had been his shield was gone, replaced with a cautious, hesitant demeanor. All the while, I continued building my own life. The cafe was thriving under my management and strategic oversight, drawing in new clients and expanding revenue. My work performance had propelled me to a new level of influence and respect. But the real satisfaction wasn't in these achievements alone. It was in watching the ripple effect of consequences reach the very people who had underestimated me for so long. The quiet, invisible victories accumulated steadily, each one chipping away at the foundation they had assumed unshakable. The final confrontation didn't need to be staged. I didn't have to call them out or flaunt my power in a dramatic showdown. Instead, it unfolded organically through their reactions to the changes that my patience, planning, and resilience had brought about. Mom stopped sending veiled, guilt-laden messages, realizing that her attempts to manipulate had lost all effectiveness. Dad no longer tried to corner me or issue subtle threats, knowing that I was untouchable in the ways that mattered. And Ryan stopped calling altogether, too ashamed, too aware of the irreversible consequences, and too cautious of the legal implications if he pushed too far. One afternoon, I received a formal letter from Ryan's lawyer, a carefully worded document acknowledging the failed attempts to interfere with the inheritance and proposing an official settlement. All future requests would require transparency and mutual consent, and no further legal action would be pursued if compliance was maintained. I read it calmly, setting it aside. It was the final acknowledgement of the power shift, not a dramatic battle won with force, but the quiet, undeniable validation that the tide had turned. The moment that truly crystallized the entire journey came on a Sunday morning, when I sat at my kitchen table, enjoying my coffee, listening to the soft hum of the city outside. I glanced at the unopened envelope from my grandmother's lawyer, still sitting neatly on my desk, and I realized something profound. The last decade of manipulation, favoritism, and betrayal had ended, not with confrontation, but with patient, deliberate action. The people who had sought to belittle me, control me, and steal from me were left to confront the consequences of their own choices. They were still my family by name, but the dynamic that had defined our interactions for so long had been irrevocably altered. It wasn't just about money or power. It was about respect. It was about finally being seen as the person I had become, someone who couldn't be undermined, manipulated, or dismissed. The calm satisfaction I felt wasn't bitter. It wasn't about revenge in the traditional, destructive sense. It was the quiet, composed awareness that I had endured the worst, planned meticulously, and executed with precision. I had turned weakness into strength, betrayal into leverage, and silence into authority. In the weeks that followed, the changes became permanent. My parents grew distant, their attempts at control replaced with a cautious, almost reverent observation. Ryan avoided any situation where I could exert influence over the inheritance, the family, or our mutual connections. I attended family events when I chose, on my own terms, and each interaction was a subtle assertion of control. No one mocked me, no one belittled me, and no one tried to manipulate me again. And yet, the most satisfying moment wasn't in their silence or fear. It was in the understanding that I had done this entirely on my own terms. I hadn't lashed out. I hadn't resorted to public shaming or humiliation. I had simply waited, observed, planned, and acted strategically. The result was unmistakable. My life was mine, untainted by their manipulation, my worth recognized without their approval, and my control absolute. Sitting back in my chair, I finally allowed myself to smile, a slow, satisfied smile. The storm had passed. The betrayal had been answered, not with chaos, but with calculated power. The family that had underestimated me for decades had finally learned, in the quietest but most undeniable way possible, that the one they had mocked was the one who held the true control. And in that moment, with the city humming softly around me and the envelope unopened yet fully secure, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. They had lost their power, and I had gained everything. I had finally won. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.